Illuminism and the Master Plan for World Domination by David Allen Rivera, 1994. Having Chapter 9.2, Centralization of Government Power. Federal Districts and Faculty Borders, Replacing the U.S. Constitution. Having the 10 Federal Regions, 1972. Editor note: this chapter has been condensed. The original text is available at the author's website. On April 21, 1935, a New York Times magazine published a plan in which the states would merge into a unit called Federal Regions that would be controlled from Washington, D.C. In 1959, Nelson Rockefeller called for an Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations, a SEIR, which became a federally funded Rockefeller think tank within Congress to prepare a working formula for the concept. The Assyrian Life Information produced by the Public Administration Clearinghouse, also known as the 1313, and translated it into legislation to develop regional government, which would usurp the power of the local government. The Clearinghouse, located at the Rockefeller-controlled University of Chicago, represented a group of 26 private organizations, which have been infiltrating local government agencies to usurp their power and authority. Some of the organizations are National Association of Counted, National League of Cities, U.S. Conference of Mayors, American Public Works Association, Public Personnel Association, National Association of Attorney Generals, and the National Governors Conference. Their purpose was to train and place a new administrative class in every level of government, which would replace elected officials. On March 27, 1969, as published in the Federal Register under the direction of Hillel Heidi Upmeyers, including Nelson Rockefeller, President Nixon announced the restructuring of government service systems plan, which called for the merging of the states into 8 later 10 federally controlled regions. The Executive Order 11,647 was signed by Nixon on February 10, 1972. Establishing federal regional councils for the development of closer working relationships between major federal rent-making agencies on state and local government. An executive order, when decreed by the President, is printed in the Federal Register and then, unless challenged by Congress, becomes law 15 days later. The executive order was unconstitutional because Article Roman Forum for the U.S. Constitution prohibited the merging of the states and guaranteed a government represented by elected officials. However, regional government was accepted by the states because it brought with it revenue-sharing funds. In each of the 10 standard federal regions, there was to be a council made up of the directors of the regional offices of federal departments and agencies. The resident 8-1 member of each council as the chairman. Here is half a 10 region SLS and regional offices, quote, list: Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Boston, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New York, New Jersey, Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, Maryland, Delaware, West Virginia, District of Columbia, Kentucky, Tennessee, North Carolina, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Atlanta, South Carolina, Florida, and the state of Ohio. Tennessee, North Carolina, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Atlanta, South Carolina, Florida. Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, Chicago, Indiana, Ohio, New Mexico, Oklahoma. Texas, Dallas, FD, where are Arkansas, Louisiana, Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas. City, Missouri, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, Denver. Arizona, Nevada, Hawaii, California, San Francisco, American, Samoa, Guam, and Marian Islands, Marshall Islands, Micronesia, Idaho, Washington, Seattle, Oregon, Alaska. And quote, the October 1976 Jimmy Carter said before the National Association of Regional Councils, the ARC, quote, I believe that regional organizations should be strengthened. If elected president, I intend first to upgrade the role of regional councils, representing the federal government to assist state and local officials, as well as private citizens, and dealing with federal agencies. I also intend to encourage the Development of regional councils representing state and local governments, and quote. Carter expanded the federal regional system on July 20, 1979 with the Executive Order 12,149 to provide a structure for interagency and intergovernmental cooperation to establish practical and appropriately a non-function with state, tribal, regional, and local officials. Each of the 10 councils were made up and representative from each of the following agencies: Department of Linearity Area, Department of Agriculture, Department of Commerce, Department of Labor, Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, Department of Housing and Urban Development, Department of Transportation, Department of Energy, Environmental Protection. Agency: Community Services Administration, Office of Personnel Management, General Services Administration, Action Peace Corps, Vista, Senior Citizen Programs, and others. Special Volunteer Programs, Small Business Administration, Federal Emergency Management. Agency: U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and Regional Action Planning Commission. It included over 558 programs and block grants. The Department of Education was added later, after it separated from the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, which became the Department of Health and Human Services. Adding the Federal Emergency Management Agency, 1979. On the same day, July 20, 1979, Carter signed an Executive Order 12,148. Federal Emergency Management, which created the Federal Emergency Management Agency, an agency within the Department of Justice, which oversees all of the federal agencies that have specific due to enduring times of emergency, such as the Federal Disaster Assistance Agency and the Federal Emergency Broadcast System. It seems that only about 10% of its personnel are actually involved in disaster assistance. It also has the capability to assume emergency government control is necessary, and they have been given police powers, which some researchers believe will be used as the enforcement branch of the regional government. In other words, a national police force. Its purpose was to merge every community's police force, transferring control of them to the central government. This was done through revenue-sharing funds, providing special training programs to the local police, special communications equipment, and other things. The National Guard began receiving SWAT, Special Weapons and Tactical Team, training to be part of this National Police Force, located at the National Security Agency building in Fort Meade, Maryland. It has been reported that FEMA has been actively engaged in developing a computer database for CAPS, Crisis Action Programs, to collect record on millions of Americans. In addition to dividing the country into 10 federal regions, bypassing state and local government, the government has also been making plans for the establishment of a literal dictatorship in the event of a declared emergency, which among other things will freeze prices and wages, close the stock exchange, and regulate the amount of money you can withdraw from your checking and saving account. Quote, List 10,312. December 10, 51 gives government the power to take over all radio stations. 10.346.0-4-17-52. All federal departments and agencies are required to prepare civil defense plans. 10.995.0-2-16-62 gives government the power to take over all communications and media. 10.997.0-2-16 10.162.0-4-16.0-4-17-52 All federal departments and agencies are required to prepare the emergency plan. 11,000, February 16, 62, gives government the authority to mobilize it in an interwork forces under government supervision. 11,001, February 16, 62, gives government the Power to take over all health, welfare, and educational function 11,020, February 16, 62. The Postmaster General will be responsible for registering all Americans 11,030. February 16, 62, gives government the power to take over all airports and aircraft 11,040. February 16, 62, gives government the power to take over all housing and financial institutions. To relocate communities, direct new housing with public funds, to declare areas to be abandoned because they are unsafe, and to establish new locations for the population 11,005. February 16, 62, gives government the power to take over all railroads, inland waterways, and public storage facilities 11,051, September 27, 62, offer a nation for a negative order to be put into effect during times of international, economic, or financial crisis, and for the Office of Emergency Planning to carry them out 11,310, October 11, 66, gives government the power to evolve reasons to administer medical treatment for mass feeding and for housing, end quote. And the majority of 11-410-28-69, which was amended by Order 11-921-6-11-76, consolidated the previous and the majority of 10-312-10, 346-10, 997-11-000-5, 11,877 to 11,995. And 11,310, it assigned emergency preparedness functions to most federal departments and agencies to assure the continuity of the federal government. Since 1876, successive administrations have continued to increase the emergency powers of the federal government via effective orders and legislation, the declaration of an emergency, and at the discretion of the President, and having the new state's Constitution, 1874. In October 1970, the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions, a tax emblem, foundation in Santa Barbara, California, financed by the Ford and Rockefeller with up to another $2.5 million annually, published in their magazine Center article called The Constitution for the United Republic of America. The principal author of this document was restored by Farewell Assistant Secretary of Agriculture under President Franklin Roosevelt, who directed a team of close to 100 socialist educators who contributed to the project. In Farewell 1974 book, The Emerging Constitution, the 4th version of the original draft was published as a constitution for the new state of America, which the Ford Foundation spent another $25 million to produce and promote. Farewell claimed that our Constitution was too cumbersome and needed to be changed. He believed that it was possible to get this new Constitution adopted, and said, quote, "It could happen that the present system of government would prove so instructive and would fail so abysmally to meet the needs of a continental people and a great power. Net general recognition of the crisis would occur. There might then be a redrafting of the basic law, and, if so, then it might be that this model we have worked out over a number of years might be taken into account." End quote. The new Constitution called for the states to be divided into 10 federal regions, called republics, which would be subservient departments of the national government. The president would serve one 9-year term with 2 vice-presidents. 100 senators would be appointed by the president for lifetime terms, not elected, and there would be 400 members in the House of Representatives. Each of the 100 congressional districts would elect 3 representatives for 3-year terms. 100 would be elected by the entire country to serve 9-year terms, and only they could become committee chairmen. This proposed constitution contains no guarantee of the freedoms, and we now have under the Bill of Rights. For example, Article 1, Part A, Section 1, freedom of expression shall not be abridged, except in a declared emergency. In an emergency, the government would have the power to curtail communication, movement, and the right to assemble. Article 1, Part B, Section 8, the bearing of arms, or the possession of lethal weapons, shall be confined to police, members of the armed forces, and those licensed under the law. Private citizens would not be allowed to own firearms. Article B, Part B, Section 9, Subsection 8, the assist in the maintenance of world order. The mass jurisdiction in international legislative, judicial, and administrative agencies. A meeting arranged by Nelson Rockefeller was held from April 5. The 1976 in Philadelphia with representatives from the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions, the League of Women Voters, the National Council of Churches, National Urban League, NOC, United Auto Workers, Common Cause, and various other university professors and governmental experts to study our present Constitution to see if it could be modernized and improved. With the completion of the proposed new state's constitution, Vice President Nelson Rockefeller, President of the U.S. Senate, developed support for the introduction of H.C.R. 28, which called for unlimited constitutional convention in 1976, with public opposition soundly defeated. This attempt, so the convention supporters then went to the state promoting a limited convention for the purpose of adding a balanced budget amendment. They were able to convince 32 of the required 34 states to pass resolutions calling for a convention, the last state to sign on one memory in 1983, but after that, the legislature in 3 states, Alabama, Florida, and Louisiana, realized the consequences of their actions and rescinded their call, having the Declaration of Interdependence, the 1976. On January 30, 1976, came the announcement of a Declaration of Interdependence, a document which endorsed a one-world government. The announcement was made at a meeting held at Philadelphia Independence Hall, which was sponsored by the World Affairs Council and confirmed from a 5-point program they had announced in September 1975. The meeting was funded with another $100,000 grant from the Pennsylvania Pacentennial Committee. The document written by CFR member Henry Steele Comseger began with this sentence, quote, "2 centuries ago our forefathers brought forth a new nation, now we must join with others to bring forth a new world order," end quote. It was signed by 24 U.S. senators and 80 U.S. representatives, including, quote, List and Alan Cranston, DCA, CFR, and Jacob Gavitz, RNY, and Hubert Humphrey, DMN, and George McGovern, DSD, and William Proxmire, DWI, and Charles Matthews, CFR, and Claiborne Pell, CFR, Rep. Paul Simon, Rep. Patricia Schroeder, Rep. Louise Tokes, Rep. Les Haskin, Secretary of Defense under Clinton, Rep. John B. Anderson, RIL, Rep. Maurice K., UDLD, and quote. This document went through further drafts, and in 1984, it was presented by the Committee on the Constitutional System, CCS, and an alternative to the existing Constitution. One of the group's board members, James McBretterburn, a history professor, said, quote, "If we are to turn the founder upside down, we must directly confront the constitutional structure they erected," end quote. About a third of the CCS board members belonged to the CFR, including Chairman C. Gunland, Foreign Secretary of Treasury, Lloyd Cutler, Foreign Legal Counsel to President Carter, and Counsel to President Clinton, and Sen. Nancy Cassabam. Some of the other members were Robert McNamara, Foreign Secretary of Defense under Kennedy and Johnson, Sen. Daniel Patrick Moynihan, Sen. Charles Matthews, Sen. J. William Fulbright, and others who were associated with the Brookings Institution, Rockefeller Foundation, and Wove Rock Wheels and Center. It is ironic, but organizations claiming to be conservative seem to be the strongest Supporters for a constitutional convention. Most notable are American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, National Taxpayer Union, NTU, Republican National Committee, RNC, and the Committee on the Constitutional System, CCS. In 1992, Ross Verrett, who have become a political force to be reckoned with, publicly called for a constitutional convention and guest appearances with Barbara Walters, Phil Donahue, and Larry King. He stated that we needed a parliamentary government and pledged that his people could get the remaining states needed for a constitutional convention called in their sleep. Heading the Conference of States, 1995. 100 red, 100 red, 100 red, 100 red Constitution was the Conference of States, CCS. It was being peddled at the movement for the states to come together and discuss the need to balance the relationship between the states and the federal government in a co-equal partnership, and more original constitution intended for the states to be sovereign and for the federal government to only have limited powers. Their first meeting was to be held in Annapolis, Maryland, July 6, 1995, with a historical reenactment of the 1786 Annapolis Convention, and the second have been planned for October 24, 26, 1995, which, ironica Wiley, was the 50th anniversary of the establishment of the UN, in Philadelphia, VA, reenactment of the 1787 Convention. It was being funded by 3 private organizations, which are associated with the Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations, ASER, Council and State Governments, CSC, established in 1930 with funding from a Rockefeller Grant, National Government Association, MBA, and the National Conference on State Legislature, MCSL, established in 1933 with funding from a Rockefeller Grant. In December of 1994, the MCSL for the meeting in North Carolina, where state legislators were told the Conference of States was a way for states to keep the federal government from encroaching on their sovereignty. So this cost resolution was taken back to their respective state legislatures, and the first 12 states were able to ratify it through deceit by having legislative leaders introduce it, bypassing any committee so there would be no hearing, and bringing it to the floor for a quick vote. According to Michael Levy, the Republican governor of Utah, the goal of the resolution proponents was to have 26 states pass it, although Governor Nelson, Nebraska, was pressing for 34, which was the NMAC number of states needed to call for a constitutional convention. Leavitt, a member of the ASER, told the South Lake City Tribune in 1994 that he wanted a constitutional convention. In a May 1994 position paper, he sent that our government was updated and old-fashioned, not suited for the fast-paced, high-pack, global marketplace we are entering. There is a better way. The better way, he suggested, seemed to be an end run around the Constitution, because the cost literature indicated their interest in passing constitutional amendments. He indicated his high expectations for what the meeting could accomplish. Quote, Congress tried to limit the convention authority by stating it would meet for the sole and express purpose of revising the Articles of Confederation. As we all know, the delegates to the Great Constitutional Convention in 1787 in Philadelphia did much more than that. They threw out the Articles of Confederation and drafted a new constitution. End quote. The Article 5 on the Constitution indicates that 2/3 of the states must vote for a constitutional convention before Congress could call one. The COS was planning to use the same method, but delegates did at the Annapolis Convention in 1786. Within 10 years, the Constitution had one originally drafted on June 12, 1776, and fully ratified by 1781 was no longer able to meet the needs of a brawling nation. The delegates of Virginia, New York, Delaware, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, meeting in Annapolis, were charged with the task of amending the Articles of Confederation and were to meet in Philadelphia for the sole and express purpose of revising them. The need for a stronger central government won express, one that didn't limit state sites. However, upon meeting in Philadelphia in May 1787, they locked all the doors and posted armed guards, and even closed all the windows so they could deliver it in secret. While they actually set up a new national government, neither the Congress or the people could stop them. Their work was finished on September 17, 1787, and was fully ratified on May 29, 1770, and the Constitution of the United States was born and is still in existence today. Many people were worried about this conference on states because nobody was really sure what could happen. Charles Good, the Republican state senator from Colorado, sent that the CIS would be the end of the sword that knocks the head off the Constitution. Case law mandates that members of a constitutional convention must be directly elected by the people so they can act as their representatives to exercise the sovereign power of the state. Each state delegation to the CIS would consist of the governor and 2 leaders from each party in the state legislature, plus 2 alternates, 1 from each party, and therefore could be empowered with the necessary legal status and representative of the people should the decision be made to turn the meeting into a constitutional convention. Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich, RDA, and 33rd degree Mason Bob Dole, RKS, openly supported the CIS, and on March 24, 1995, Republican Senator Hank Brown, CEO, and S. Helms, RMC, sponsored a Senate revolution which would give congressional authorization to transform the CIS into a bona fide constitutional convention. They maintained that without this congressional approval, it would be in conflict with Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution, which does not allow any agreements between states. Ultimately, only 14 state legislatures passed resolutions calling for their participation in the CIS, which was short on the 26 needed. Their organizational meetings scheduled for July 1995 was canceled. It is obvious that they will not even take an approved approach to regional government. They have been working within the confines of the executive branch to get various and their executive orders passed, and they have also used their various finger organizations to study our existing Constitution and recommend changes. All of their efforts may eventually culminate in a call for a constitutional convention that will spell the end of the Republic as we know it in this country. Tapal Barsa.